Joining us today are retired U.S. intelligence officer Colonel John Sweet and national security and foreign policy expert Mark Toth. Welcome to our show.
Hey, Sophia, thanks for having us back on.
Sophia, great to be back. Thank you.
Mark, Donald Trump is preparing for a new meeting with Vladimir Putin and has reportedly decided not to send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. How do you explain this sudden U-turn from the U.S. president just weeks after reports suggested the opposite?
Yeah, Sophia, it's a great question because I think, look, Tomahawks in Trump's mind were always leveraged to try to get this meeting. I think when we look back in retrospect, his desire was to get Putin to the negotiating table, and he thought the best possible means of that was threatening to give Ukraine Tomahawks. Now, obviously, Zelensky was on the same page, but saw the use of those Tomahawks differently. He wanted to actually get them, threaten to use them, if not use them in a demonstration of force to get Putin to a meaningful negotiation process. So I think that explains it. But I think we're beyond this, Sophia. I think really when we step back and we look at this, Europe is on the edge of World War III now, and we can't just keep reacting in terms of what Trump is doing. But this really now becomes a discussion, an urgent discussion of what Europe needs to be doing to stop this World War III that is on its borders, because the ground zero of it is in Ukraine right now. And at this point, at least from a negotiating standpoint, Putin has that advantage, and the West needs to take that away.
Putin's phone call coming just a day before Zelensky's meeting with Trump, and now it looks like the Russian dictator was genuinely alarmed by the prospects of Tomahawks in Ukrainian hands. Yet many analysts argued that those missiles would not change the course of the war. John, from a military standpoint, does Russia really fear these weapons, and what would their use mean on the battlefield in practical terms?
Well, yeah, of course they fear that weapon. Look, the Russian military has been ineffective in downing Ukrainian drones and Ukrainian missiles. The Tomahawk missile system itself is superior to those systems, and the Russian air defense system simply could not and would not be able to defeat the Tomahawk. Look, Ukraine doesn't need 200 Tomahawks. Ukraine could use 20 to 30 Tomahawks to make a difference. And when I say make a difference, I mean go after those weapon systems that are currently inflicting the greatest number of casualties on the battlefield, and that is the ballistic missiles and also the drones that are being fired upon them. 4 targets, and we mentioned this in our article on Substack. The 4 targets that they should be considering, and I'm sure they would if they had the missiles: Ingalls Air Base, which is the home of the Tu-95s that deliver ballistic missiles, but also the Shahed drone factories that are present in Russia. You take those 2 out, and then from a strategic perspective, as a closer, as isolation of Crimea, is to knock out the Kerch Street Bridge. So no, they don't need 200 to 300. They need the right number. In addition to other weapon systems. Okay, the Tomahawk is not the silver bullet, but the Tomahawk is one of many weapon systems that are available. So yes, Putin was concerned enough to pick up the phone, as Mark said, to call Trump to schedule another meeting, in a sense, to buy additional time to prevent those particular weapon systems to be given to Ukraine.
While the U.S. hesitates, another crucial missile system Ukraine could receive is the German-made Taurus. John, could such system realistically substitute for the Tomahawks?
Again, I wouldn't say substitute. I would say complement. Okay, it has an explosive warhead that's of equal magnitude to the Tomahawk. I'm not sure about the range. The range of the Tomahawk can range anywhere between 1,500 miles outwards to 2,500 miles. So I don't think it gives them the same distance, but it gives them a similar capability as far as reaching certain targets that are affecting them. But again, as Mark reiterated, NATO and the European Union need to do more now. Okay, I know the European Union delegation recently met in Brussels to discuss their read in his 2030 proposal, which is noble and which is something they need to do. But 2030 is going to be 5 years too late. So we've been talking about the Taurus missile system now for what? 12 months, at least 18 months when Merz is running for president. And now that he is, in a sense, the chancellor of Germany, but we still haven't seen that particular system given up. Okay, and I understand they're holding their cards closer because Germany may need them later, but later is too late. They need to deal with the Russian threat today. If you remove the Russian threat today, a lot of other problems in the world will stop.
Mark, I would like to just understand what is the problem for Berlin, basically, to take this decision and deliver these long-range Taurus missiles for Kyiv?
Yeah, I think part of it is just a general mindset here. We keep talking about what Ukraine needs, and that's fine, right? We can debate things like the Tomahawk, which gives you a deeper strike capability than the Taurus does. The Taurus is maybe a third of that kind of distance, although the Taurus has certain advantages in terms of its double strike capability, so it can do bunker busting type operations. That's all good. We can talk systems, but in reality, what we need to be talking about is Europe needs to find its spine. At this point, whether it's been Emmanuel Macron in France, whether it's been Keir Starmer in the UK, and now even disappointingly Friedrich Merz in Germany, they keep looking to Trump to basically say, hey, this is the tune we're going to march to. Europe has got to understand this is not 2025 anymore. We are, in effect, back in 1938. The threat is real. Hitler is again trying to talk to the current modern-day chamberlains of Europe and say, hey, we can have peace in our time. But that's not going to happen. And so from the standpoint of getting the Taurus missile released and stuff, it just needs to be done. There have been 31 contact meetings so far. They're in the Ramstein format since this war began. There have been countless meetings where European leaders go and meet and talk about what they need to be doing to counter Russia. But none of it recognizes the deep and immediate threat beyond simple words. Their actions aren't there. That Russia is posing right now. So when I say it's 1938, I mean it. Now is the critical time. There's a crossroad here. Europe is either going to understand that World War III is on its doorsteps and it's going to react to stop it in its tracks by giving everything immediately that Ukraine needs and more, or we're going to go down the 1938 path where Europe's security gets a lot worse and things like the Suwalki Gap will come into play down the road. And as John said, look, if they're waiting to defend themselves until 2030, it's too late because the fight right now is on the Ukraine front lines in the Donbass and then in the south toward Crimea. That's just my opinion. So it's time to stop talking about this. It's time for Europe to start doing it. And Trump's not yet going to do it, so stop looking to him. Europe needs to look to itself.
And indeed, I would like also to touch on the topic of the potential meeting between Donald Trump and Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. It's going to be the second meeting. And we know that the previous one in Alaska brought little progress. Putin basically refused to sit down with President Zelensky or even discuss a ceasefire. Now, a second meeting appears to be in the works, and it seems that Kremlin is once again trying to buy time. Mark, what's your take on that?
It is. Look, this is just kabuki theater. You know, I as a small child, I lived in Japan, saw plenty of it. What we're seeing here is just a Groundhog Day, if you will, play out of Alaska, except with a change of scenery. Now we're going to be in Budapest if Putin actually does come and attend that meeting. Nothing much is going to change. And we know that because just today, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, is saying, look, there's going to be no ceasefire unless all the root causes, quote unquote, root causes of the war are addressed. That's code for him saying our maximalist positions, negotiating positions remain. And by root causes, they mean they want assurances that Ukraine would not become part of NATO. They want assurances that no NATO troops, either as NATO flagged troops or as a coalition of the willing, are inside forming some kind of security corridor in a post-war Ukraine. And they basically want Ukraine or Kiev as a government government to be subservient to to Moscow and to basically become a satellite state again. None of that is acceptable. So, from that standpoint, I think Budapest is just a replication of Alaska in the making. It's going to achieve nothing except unless you're Putin, which is a play for time, which is why I believe, frankly, and again, to keep circling back and pounding on this point, Europe has to say enough. Let's stop this kabuki theater. Let's stop playing it at this time, because real Ukrainian civilians are dying. Real threats are beginning to form that we've seen already in Poland with the drones overflying their territory. Ditto Romania, the overflights of Russian MiGs that were carrying Kinzhal missiles, which are capable of carrying nuclear weapons over Estonia and the like. It's time not to put up with this. Budapest is just 2 weeks vacation for Putin to continue his war, sadly, in Ukraine. Not acceptable.
Mark, and what's your opinion about the whole idea of the meeting in Budapest? Actually, Hungary is still the member of the European Union, and still Hungary supports sanctions against Russia, even if we see that Orban really likes Vladimir Putin and meets with him in Moscow and etc. I'm trying to understand if the whole European Union is against Putin, against Russia at all, and want to see the long and lasting peace and everything, and respect basically for the international law. Why the meeting would be happen there in Budapest?
Yeah, I can't think of, if I were a Putin's advisor, which I never would be, I can't imagine picking a city that would have more messaging aspects to it than Budapest, because all of us initially think back to 1994 and the Budapest Agreement that caused Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons capability. And so Putin has to be thrilled. Look, the U.S. so far is saying they're the ones that came up with Budapest. Time will tell. But if you're Putin, you just can't imagine any better place, because that's perfect messaging for him to send back through his state-controlled media to the Russian people. We're going to Budapest again, because in their minds, Budapest was a very good achievement back in 1994, even though it was a tragedy for Ukraine and ultimately a tragedy for the rest of the world. So, from that standpoint, I think really this comes down to some domestic politics in the U.S., as well as some geopolitics that are coming out of the White House, where you have Trump wanting to support Orbán in the upcoming election in Hungary, and this was a means to do it. I just don't think Team Trump thought that through very well in trying to, in effect, support an ally's re-election. He didn't think through the strategic implications of giving Putin that kind of messaging when. But again, just another reason why Europe needs to be looking to itself right now, not Trump, in terms of setting the agenda of how Putin is confronted, deterred, and ultimately expelled from Ukraine.
At the same time, despite recent phone calls, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and U.S. Marco Rubio are reportedly not planning to meet this week. John, what does this indicate to us?
Well, it indicates they don't have a start point. It's just like Mark said. Nothing's changed on the Russian side. They still want what they want. And President Zelensky, following to his discussions with Trump, came right out and said, Ukraine's not for sale. We're not going to give up any terrain. So at the end of the day, nothing's changed. Russia's not going to accept a ceasefire in order to get to a peace deal. Ukraine would accept a ceasefire, but it's just not going to happen, because at the end of the day, it calls for the total capitulation of Ukraine. Look, I don't think any of these ceasefire meetings or peace conferences or any of those discussions that involve a bilateral discussion between Russia and the United States will work, because the one country that's not present, the one that's most affected, the one that's been invaded, the one that's defending its country is Ukraine. Okay, it can't be a peace deal between the United States and Russia that involves Ukraine. It has to be about Ukraine. The war stops when Russia stops attacking. And the president has been very adamant about, look, 7,000 people are dying every week. They're dying because Russia is attacking, not because directly because Russia is attacking, because Ukraine's defending. Get Russia to stop attacking, and the dying stops. Okay, Ukraine isn't targeting Russian civilians. Ukraine is targeting Russian soldiers that are attacking them. So if you're going to bring the war to a conclusion, Zelensky has to be involved. It can't be a discussion between Putin and Trump. Okay, it does have to be about the root cause, though, and the root cause is Putin, and I think that's pretty clear. And until the president is willing to confront Putin, the root cause, okay, to get him to stop, to use tools to get him to stop, the killing goes on, the war goes on. Ukraine's not going to submit.
According to the Washington Post, during his phone call with President Trump, Vladimir Putin reportedly demanded that Ukraine hand over full control of the Donetsk region as a condition for ending the war. John, what would it mean, military speaking, if Donbass were effectively ceded to Russia?
Well, first of all, it's not going to happen, okay? And let's go back to an article that we wrote today, that Mark Toth and I wrote today in the Kiev Post, and we talk about this specifically. Putin wants to obtain through peace deals what he cannot obtain on the battlefront, okay? His military force is incapable of getting to Kyiv, but they're also incapable of securing Donbass. They would like to remove the Donbass fortress. Okay, but what that does is opens up the rest of Ukraine, if there is a peace deal, to go into Kyiv, to get into Odessa, to encircle and overthrow the government. And look, Ukraine's not going to let that happen. That may be on the wish list for Putin, but it's certainly not something that's going to be granted. And whatever discussions occur between President Trump and President Putin, there's not going to be an exchange of territory unless Ukraine's part of the deal. That's not Trump's to give. Okay. And also, Europe has a role in this too. And we continue to discuss the European role in this. But why would Europe want that to occur? That would just open up their eastern flank to more hazardous conditions by Russia. And oh, by the way, if you're Moldova, it presents a significant problem if Odessa is captured, because then Russian forces could roll right up into Transnistria and back into Moldova. So it's not likely to happen.
President Zelensky yesterday said that U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff claimed Donetsk and Lugansk are already listed as Russian regions in Russia's constitution. Mark, why would the American side use such arguments? Because for me, this doesn't sound like the respect for international law, does it?
Yeah, Sophia, it's a fair question. There are two possible explanations. One is Witkoff is just being foolish. I mean, obviously, there's no basis in international law to allow another country simply to decide as a constitutional amendment that they get to absorb territory from another country. If that's the case, I guess what? Alaska's next, right? Russia can just pass an amendment to its constitution and retake it. I mean, that's just utter nonsense. There's other speculation that's out there that the U.S. was testing Zelensky during these meetings and using Steve Witkoff as the messenger to try to see whether or not Ukraine had reached a point where they were willing to give up territory. In my mind, it matters little, correct? Because from my standpoint, Ukraine should not give up 1 square inch in any of this process to Russia. Russia cannot be awarded for illegally invading Ukraine, not just in 2022, but obviously also in 2014 in seizing territory. The only possible ultimate income or outcome of this war has got to be that Russia leaves every inch of sovereign Ukrainian territory, and that includes Crimea. Now, how we get there may have to be phased, okay? There are realities on the ground. There are war considerations to be had, and maybe it's in the best interests of both countries to come up with a ceasefire. Zelensky has certainly said that, but that's up for your country to decide whether or not you need to take a pause before you ultimately get, ideally through negotiations, all of your territory back. That's to remain determined. But again, to kind of keep circling back, because I feel like I'm a Churchill-like person in the 1930s trying to scream about the threat. Until Europe gives Zelensky the teeth to do that, not just in terms of the military actions, but stop the words and start doing, get the no-fly zone over Western Ukraine so that Ukrainian armed forces can push up their air force assets, start interdicting Russian drones as they come through, start taking proactive actions as Europe to protect itself, none of this is going to matter because Zelensky will not have enough of a negotiating hand. And I think what we'll just basically see is the conflict continuing as is, which is Russia bleeding and Ukraine bleeding, and not enough movement forward in a positive way that allows Ukraine to win this nightmare. And then, as I keep arguing, as we talked a lot about today's article in the Kiev Post, it sets up the situation where this World War III that we keep talking about can potentially turn from what we've argued is an ideological one that Xi Jinping, the leader of China and Russia and Putin, have waged against the West overtly in Ukraine from a kinetic standpoint, but also hybrid throughout Europe and potentially even in the U.S., suddenly become more of Hollywood's version of it. And that's dangerous. And so we need to stop this. It's just time for Europe to act. I can't emphasize that enough. And again, to keep repeating it, we really are on the edge of World War III if Europe doesn't start acting on its own and stop waiting for Trump.
Beyond the US-Russia contacts, European leaders are also preparing to meet this week, first at the European Council in Brussels and then in London for the coalition of the willing. I would like to hear from both of you what's your expectations from this meeting, what should Kyiv expect, and what kind of role can Europe play in this situation, especially since you mentioned that Europe should and have to take the stronger position in this war?
Yeah, I'll start off and then we'll let Mark jump in. Look, it's another meeting, okay? And Mark said this a couple times with the coalition of willing and in the contact groups in Ramstein. Another meeting is not going to solve the problem. Another condemnation of Russian, killing civilians. Another condemnation of Russia flying, and invading airspace of NATO. More condemnation of sabotage operations that are going on within Europe that have Putin's fingerprints all over them. It doesn't stop anything. More discussion about we're going to unfreeze funds, but yet we're not going to unfreeze funds. It doesn't help. It's demonstration that has zero effect until you actually do something. And Putin only understands something done to him. He doesn't understand talk about it because it's just talk and he ignores it. He only understands that strong punch to the face, okay? And defense, okay? Passive defense, which is what, in a sense, NATO's playing right now in the European Union, it's not going to do it. It's going to have to be an active defense in which they take aggressive action against the Russian threat, okay, in which their rules of engagement are clearly defined. You're not asking permission to do something. Rather, you're given permission to acquire targets as they enter your airspace or as they come across your terrain. So it's going to take more than words. The commitment, though, the coalition of willing, as far as funding, as far as, artillery rounds and air defense systems, that's all great too. It's something that Ukraine needs, but Europe's going to have to play a more active role. Sitting on the sidelines and cheering isn't an active role, okay? And then digging in along your defensive lines and then claiming that Russia's going to invade you in 5 years isn't helpful either. So it's going to have to be less talk, more decisive action to get Putin's attention. Mark?
Yeah, Sophia, look, I'm tired of these photo op type meetings, and I just want to be blunt here. I read the statement that was put out by Zelensky, and I don't blame him. Look, he's got to go with the flow here and get what he can get. But I do blame the statement that was put out by Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, Emmanuel Macron, the President of France, the Italian Prime Minister Meloni, the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, and even Ursula von der Leyen of the European Union, the president of that. I mean, basically, all their statement said is that, look, Russia bad, Ukraine good, and maybe we need to ramp up pressure against Russia, and we need to ramp up economic pressure and try to pin them a little bit on defense. And then as well, try to ramp up using funds that are frozen in Brussels to come to the aid of Ukraine. We've heard all of that before. How many times do they have to talk about it? I mean, at some point, you just have to get angry here, and I am angry. I'm angry because this is just another photo op, another opportunity to have coffee, another opportunity to fire up jets, go meet in another location. This time it's going to be Brussels, and then there's supposed to be a companion meeting that's happening in London. And for what? Nothing is changing here. I mean, Europe is acting like they have time, and they do not. I mean, this is an immediate crisis that's on their hands that Budapest could take in a very wrong direction. Like I said, we're at a crossroads. And if you choose the wrong kind of peace, which is how John and I pinned that today in the Kiev Post, it can lead to god-awful things. Chamberlain back in 1938 chose the wrong peace with Hitler, and it ultimately ended up, as best estimates have it, that 85 million people died in World War II. We're facing the same kind of consequences, not necessarily in terms of the number of people that died, but the risk to the world order in terms of peace and stability going forward. And Europe has just got to stop it with these nonsense type meetings. Enough already. Get an action plan. Start implementing it. Go back to what Churchill used to say during World War II. Action this day. There's just no more need for these kind of meetings. It's a waste of time. Start doing it.
Thanks for being with us, Colonel John Sweet and foreign policy expert Mark Toth. Thank you for your time.
Great to be back on the show. Thanks for having us.
Pleasure, Sofia. Thank you.